Welcome to my first art study of one of my most recent drawings. Living up to current anime hype, what a better way to start this series than with Gear 5 Luffy. I decided to go with a smooth and clean line art for this one, as opposed to leaving gaps for a cuter aesthetic. I wanted this drawing to look sharp and clean. I like to start with the skin because it's the most fun part to color in my opinion. I love experimenting with different angles for the shading on the face specifically. Make sure you create a new layer above the base color and select the clipping mask option to make sure your shading stays in place and doesn't go outside of the line. I always opt first for a sharp shading, no airbrush, to define where I want the shading placement. Since Luffy will be holding a lightning bolt on his right hand, that's where the light source is going to come from, illuminating the right side of his face, or our left side from where we're viewing it. I tend to choose a more yellow beige for the base, and then a more pink beige for the shading to allow some contrast on the skin, if that makes sense. Then I go in with a deeper, more brown color to add more shading on top of the base shading, creating 3 layers of color. Once I have established a guide for each shaded area, I now blend the colors and make it smoother by grabbing our base color once more and using an airbrush and go softly above the whole layer. I added a bit of highlights on the nose and edge of the face with a lighter tone of the base color. I then added a new layer with the screen blending mode and added some purple glow on some of the areas of the skin to have cold and warm tones to make the skin look a little bit more natural. For the eyes, I like using a grayish blue shade to add depth on the top part of the eye, and then do the same for the teeth part. I did something different for the hair this time. I opted for adding purple shading on the top to resemble a cloud, and then added yellow highlights on the bottom, as if it was the glow being reflected from the yellow lightning bolt I will color later on. I added some orange undertones for the yellow portion and some magenta tones for the purple part to create a more colorful, almost rainbow-like glow on the hair, just for fun. Again, started with a rough shading and then blended everything together with an airbrush. I added more yellow glow on the skin coming from the lightning bolt, using the blending mode screen and a bright yellow color. Now onto the clothes. I have learned to love this part of coloring as well. I used to dread coloring clothes, but I came up with a fun technique that makes them look a bit more realistic too. What I did was start with a light yellow beige shirt and then add bluish gray sharp shading, followed by another round of a darker shade on top, same recipe as with the skin. Then I softened it all together with a light lavender tone to mimic the cloud-like aesthetic as the hair. And finally, used a Gaussian blur brush to blend the harsh edges together. I did the same for the sash and the short, making sure that there was a stronger yellow portion on the part that is closest to the lightning bolt. For the fluffy part of the shorts, I went for a more round-like shading to mimic cotton, and then sharper and short shading for the straw hat to resemble the texture as well. For the haki effect, I have a video explaining how to achieve that effect, but basically, I use a red base and then pile up dark blue shading. You want the red part to be the glow and the dark blue the shading, so I did an opposite process starting with the light part. Then, with the blending mode add, I created thin white highlights to resemble a very bright and glossy effect. Next, I created the lightning bolt with basically sharp strokes of a light yellow color, overlapped with some white glow around it. I changed the background to a darker one to see where the glow was being placed. Now this next part I was going to delete from the video, but I wanted to leave it to show my thought process, especially when it comes to backgrounds. Because for me, that's the most tedious part to come up with. I often just go with a single color, but I wanted to create an epic scene here. So my first idea was to put Luffy standing on a water puddle or something like that, and have his reflection show in the water. I tried first copying and inverting the whole drawing, but it doesn't make sense to reflect like that from that angle. So I then tried to make a rough brushwork of the reflection and added ripples, but I didn't end up liking it either. So finally, I opted to just add a standard rocky platform as shown in his battle on Onigashima, so it made more sense anyway to have him on that setting. But I always get stuck in this part of my drawings. I always have a solid idea of how I want the characters to look like, but then struggle to put the whole piece together with the background. So I went extra hard with the details on the rocks, adding a lot of cracks on the rocks, shading, and yellow glow. I also created a cloudy sky on the back. I went with a light background because I didn't want it to be a dark image overall. I finally finished it off adding the cloud ring he has around his shoulders and back, doing the exact same effect as we did with the hair. with the purple shading on the top and the yellow lining on the bottom, then softening it all together. I decided to remove the line art of the clouds to make it more realistic, and lower the opacity slightly to make the effect that it's not solid. My favorite part to add to any action drawing or manga coloring is the smoke or fog that forms on the ground, especially when something impactful is happening. I drew thick beige swirls on different directions emerging from the center of the palm on the ground towards the outside, growing bigger in size. I mixed the green shading and then applied Gaussian blur to the whole layer, then changing the blending mode from normal into screen to create the smoky effect. Screen is the best blending mode you want to use for any fog or smoke in your drawings. Then I erased with an airbrush to make the smoke thinner and more translucent. It still felt too bright, so I created a new layer above the Luffy coloring part and used the clipping mask option to avoid coloring outside of Luffy. I used the dark blue color to add some deeper shading, using the blending mode Soft Light, so it doesn't look too harsh. I added some additional effects such as pebbles levitating from the impact and some extra impact bushes. And that's the result. This took a total of 3 hours and 22 minutes, or at least that's the time my pen was touching the screen. It certainly took more than that with all the undo action. Hope you enjoyed this little art study and you learned something new from this time-lapse review. Thank you so much for watching.